Hello. Very sober video here about the awful atrocity in Texas. But what I want to focus on is what we consider as terrorism and basically the semantics around the word terrorism. Because already there's a lot of discussion online, a lot of debate online, and a lot of memes that are insinuating that this is a case of double standards. So I want to break this down a little bit, how I see it. The insinuation being that when you have white killers, white spree killers, they're not classed as terrorists automatically because they're white. I think that's a flawed argument, and I'm going to explain why. Firstly, about this incident in a small hamlet, Sutherland Springs. Apparently, it only has a few hundred people. Um, at least 26 people dead, over 20 wounded. It's already the worst massacre in Texas. It's the worst massacre in a church in the US, and it now ranks as the fourth or fifth deadliest mass shooting in American history. The first, of course, was only a few months ago, the deadliest. So we've had the deadliest mass shooting and the fourth or fifth deadliest, depending. It's about the same as Sandy Hook at the moment. In 1 year. If this doesn't wake America up to its problem of gun violence, I don't think anything will, and I don't think this will change a damn thing, and that's tragic. Um, I don't want to spend a lot of time in this video talking about the gun issue. I'll be quite honest. I don't think I will ever understand the American logic on this, and by American, I'm not talking about everyone. I mean the American gun logic. I'm not against guns, but I cannot comprehend how there could be such a blatant problem with gun violence and people still, say we offer the prayers, it's awful, and let's just get on like nothing's happened. I don't think I'll ever understand that. In any other country in the world, when you had a specific problem, there would at least be something being done about it. And there are people in the US Congress who are trying to do something, but they're having their hands tied because the power of the gun lobby seems to be such that it's a very hard situation for outsiders to understand. It's not about being against guns. I understand that there is a gun culture in the US, and I understand the the Second Amendment. I understand all of that. What I don't understand is why people get so paranoid at any notion of gun regulation. It's like, oh, they're coming to grab our guns. I just find it baffling. I haven't seen a single example of a law-abiding gun owner having their firearms taken away. Anyway, it's an awful incident. The suspect's been identified as a Devin Kelly. Apparently, he was shot afterwards. Whether he killed himself or someone else shot him is unclear at this point. But I want to talk about this issue around terrorism because I've noticed there are a lot of people, particularly certain Muslims, and I'm not talking about everyone, because I've discussed this in British Muslims for Secular Democracy, who are saying, oh, look, this white killer is just being dismissed as mentally ill or whatever. Why is he not called a terrorist? And someone had a meme showing a photo of the shooter, and this is what a real terrorist looks like. Now, the insinuation with that is that the guy responsible for the New York attack last week, the New York City ramming incident, somehow wasn't a terrorist. So we're getting into the semantics game over what is terrorism. To me, it's quite clear. Terrorism is any act of violence that has a clear political motive. So the reason the New York attack was classed as terrorism, and so far this hasn't been, it's not to do with the number of people who died. It's not to do with how awful it was. It's to do with the motive. So in the New York City incident, the guy shouted out Allahu Akbar. He admitted in the hospital bed that he was fighting for ISIS. The motive is clear. It's terrorism. Now, in this case, this guy, Devin Kelly, as far as we know, there's been no sort of note so far. We don't know of any political allegiances. We don't know anything about this guy. It's not to say that it wasn't terrorism if it transpires that he had some sort of racial motive. As far as I know, this wasn't a black church or anything like that, but that's why. And I think people are mistaken in thinking that just because an incident's not called terrorism, then somehow it's being downplayed. What he done was no less evil than what terrorists do. It was still he still killed innocent people. It's not a case of downplaying it. It's just a case of the word terrorism has a specific definition. That's all. It's like a serial killer is different from a spree killer. It's terminology. A serial killer is someone who deliberately kills a number of people over a long period of time. They're usually psychopaths, whereas a spree killer usually does it instantaneously. So people need to understand these terminologies. That's why it's not being classed as terrorism. Now, on this issue that it's because he's white. Well, that actually is false because one of America's most notorious terrorists, in fact, the only man actually executed for terrorism, was Timothy McVeigh, a white man, right? A white man. He was responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing, which until 9/11 was America's deadliest terrorist attack. Now, it was classed as a terrorist attack because the stated motive of McVeigh was revenge for the Waco siege, unless I'm mistaken. So there's a clear political motive there. That is why it's classed as terrorism. And I'm finding it frustrating that people are trying to bring a racial dynamic to this and trying to make it a white privilege thing. That's a lot of nonsense. Timothy McVeigh was a white man, he was a terrorist, and he's widely seen as a terrorist. Another example, Anders Breivik was a terrorist. He committed a terrorist act. Why? Because his stated aim was to ignite a race war. He was a white supremacist. He was a terrorist. So let's just drop this, he's white, so he's not a terrorist thing. It just doesn't add up. The reason Muslims who commit these acts are often described as terrorists is because they're acting specifically with an Islamist ideology. If you get an example of a Muslim who commits a spree killing and they're automatically called a terrorist just because they're a Muslim, that might be misguided until the motives are established. But the fact is, in most Islamist attacks, it's clear when someone shouts Allahu Akbar, the motive is clear. It's a jihadist attack. So I think people are getting too hung up on misunderstanding the semantics, actually. This is very important because the insinuation is if a white person does it, it's not terrorism, and therefore there's double standards. But that isn't true. Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh, he was the only person executed for terrorism. So as far as I'm concerned, that totally counters the argument. Dylan Roof, as I understand, was classed as a terrorist because his attack was racially motivated. Hence, it was a political racial motivation. Um, with most spree killers, they tend to know at least some of the victims. With terrorists, most cases they don't know the victims. That's another difference. So I hope people think about these things because really, I think it's pathetic that people are going out of their way to say, "Oh, look at the white privilege," blah blah blah, and that's the only thing they care about instead of actually thinking about the victims. Um, so yeah, terrorism has a specific definition, and if this guy Devin Kelly has been shown to have an ideological reason for what he has done, um, if, for example, he's anti-Christian or anything like that, then he should be classed as a terrorist. But that is how terrorism is defined, as having a specific ideological definition. Thanks for watching.